The Broken Stranger. The sky above the abandoned mining colony was dark, filled with thick, swirling clouds. A burning spaceship fell from the sky, leaving a trail of fire behind it. The ship spun wildly before crashing into the rocky ground, shaking the earth with a loud boom. For a long moment, everything was silent. Then, a metal door on the side of the ship creaked open. A figure stumbled out, clutching her side. She was not human. Her skin had a faint silver glow, and her sharp black eyes scanned the area with caution. Vena was injured. She had lost too much blood, but she couldn't stop now. She had to find a power core. Her ship was broken, its systems dead. Without a power core, she would never leave this planet. And if she didn't leave, the bounty hunters chasing her would find her. She pulled a small device from her belt. It beeped softly, showing the ruins of the mining colony nearby. There could be parts there, maybe even an old power core she could use. With slow, painful steps, she moved forward. The colony was empty. Buildings stood in ruins, covered in dust and rust. Old mining machines lay broken, forgotten under the dark sky. Vena's heart pounded. She had been told that humans once lived here, but they were all gone now. Or so she thought. A noise came from the shadows, a small sound, metal shifting against metal. Vena froze. Her sharp eyes scanned the area. Was it an animal, or something worse? Then she saw him, a human. He stood near an old machine, watching her carefully. His clothes were worn, covered in grease and dirt. His dark hair was messy, and his face was rough with stubble. But his eyes, sharp, intelligent, showed no fear. Vena pulled out her blaster and aimed it at him. "Stay back," she warned. The man didn't move. Instead, he crossed his arms and raised an eyebrow. Not the best way to ask for help, alien. Vena narrowed her eyes. "I don't need help. I need a power core." The man tilted his head slightly. "That's so." He glanced at her wounded side. "You don't look like you'll last long without help." Vena gritted her teeth. She hated that he was right. "Who are you?" she asked. "Ethan," he said simply. "And you're trespassing on my home." Vena blinked in surprise. "You live here, alone?" Ethan gave a short, dry laugh. "Seems that way, doesn't it?" He took a slow step forward. "You're not the first to crash here, but you might be the first to point a gun at the only person who can help you." Vena hesitated. She could tell Ethan was no threat. At least, not yet. He wasn't afraid of her, which meant he was either foolish or dangerous. Maybe both. "You have a power core?" she asked, lowering her blaster slightly. Ethan smirked. "Maybe." Vena's eyes narrowed. "Give it to me." Ethan's smirk faded. "I don't give things away for free." Vena took a slow, deep breath. She was running out of time. "What do you want?" Ethan studied her for a moment. "A deal. You help me, I help you." "Help you with what?" Before he could answer, a loud beep came from Vena's device. She glanced down. Her ship's tracker had activated. Someone was scanning the wreckage. They have found her. Ethan saw the sudden tension in her face. "What's wrong?" Vena didn't answer. She grabbed Ethan's arm. "We need to move. Now." "Why?" he demanded, resisting. Vena glared at him. "Because we're not alone." A deep mechanical growl echoed through the ruins. A red light flickered in the distance. A drone. Vena cursed under her breath. "They're already here." Ethan tensed. "Who?" Vena raised her blaster. "The ones hunting me." The drone locked onto their location. A high-pitched alarm blared as it started scanning the area. Ethan didn't hesitate. "Come on." He grabbed Vena's wrist and pulled her toward a hidden doorway beneath the ruins. "We need to get underground before it calls in reinforcements." Vena wanted to protest, but she had no choice. She ran with him, diving into the shadows as the drone hovered above. As the door slid shut behind them, the last thing Vena saw was the drone sending out a signal. They knew where she was. And soon, they would come. The choice. Vena sprinted toward the slaver dropship, her heartbeat hammering against her ribs. Smoke and dust curled through the air, swirling around the ruined colony like ghosts of the past. Behind her, the disabled combat droid sparked violently, its reboot process slower than expected, but not slow enough. She had seconds. The last remaining slaver scout, the one who had escaped her grasp, was nearly at the dropship's open ramp. He was yelling into a secondary communicator, trying to warn his commanders. If he got through, if reinforcements poured down from the mothership, it was over. Vena didn't think. She moved. Her body screamed from the effort, her wound burning like fire, but she ignored it. She pushed forward, closing the distance between herself and the slaver. He turned, eyes widening in shock. Too late. Vena tackled him mid-stride, slamming both of them into the hard ground. The communicator skidded across the dirt. She moved fast, straddling him, her knee pressing hard into his chest, one hand gripping his collar, the other lifting her blaster. The slaver coughed, panicked. Wait. Vena fired. The shot wasn't fatal. She didn't have time for mercy, but it was final. The stun blast ripped through his system, sending him into a convulsing state of unconsciousness. She grabbed the communicator. No signal. The EMP was still disrupting all transmissions. Good. But her relief was short-lived. A low, mechanical whine filled the air. Vena turned just in time to see the combat droid's optics flickering back to life. Damn it. She barely had time to react before the machine lunged. It moved fast, impossibly fast, its metal limbs a blur of destruction. Vena twisted, dodging the first strike, but not the second. A metal fist slammed into her ribs, sending her flying backward. She hit the ground hard, skidding across the dirt. Pain flared through her side, and she gasped, barely holding onto her blaster. The droid advanced, its glowing red eyes locking onto her like a predator savoring the moment before the kill. Its arm shifted, unfolding into a high-energy plasma cannon. Vena gritted her teeth, trying to push herself up. Her vision blurred. Too slow. The droid raised its cannon. A sharp whistle cut through the air. Then, boom. The combat droid's head snapped to the side as a high-impact sniper round slammed into its shoulder joint, tearing metal apart. It staggered, its system recalculating, searching for the source of the attack. Vena turned her head, blinking through the dust. At the edge of the colony ruins, perched on top of an old mining tower, Reyna stood with a long-range plasma rifle. She reloaded smoothly. Get up, alien. Vena didn't need to be told twice. She rolled onto her feet as the droid recalibrated, its arm still sparking from the sniper shot. But it wasn't down. If anything, it looked angrier. Ethan's voice suddenly crackled in her earpiece. The EMP interference was fading. Vena, we've got a problem. No kidding. I'm a little busy, she shouted, dodging another strike as the droid lunged. Ethan's voice was tight. We woke the cryopods. They're alive. That should have been good news, but the way he said it, something was wrong. Vena twisted, firing 3 shots into the droid's chest. It staggered but kept coming. What's the problem? She demanded. Ethan hesitated. Then, they're sick. Vena froze for a second. That second cost her. The droid struck hard. She barely managed to twist her body, but the impact sent her crashing against the wreckage of an old transport. The world spun. Metal groaned. The droid loomed over her, its plasma cannon charging. Reyna fired again. The bullet ripped through the droid's leg, sending it down onto one knee. Vena didn't waste the opportunity. She grabbed a metal rod from the wreckage beside her. An old mining tool, long and rusted, still crackling with residual energy. As the droid tried to rise, she surged forward and drove the rod straight into its exposed core. Electricity exploded outward, blue sparks dancing across the droid's frame. It shuddered, its system failing, red optics flickering wildly. Vena twisted the rod deeper. With a final, broken screech, the droid collapsed. Silence. For a moment, all Vena could hear was her own ragged breathing. Then Reyna's voice, dry but approving. "Not bad." Vena groaned, staggering upright. "You took your time." Reyna shrugged, shouldering her rifle. "Figured you could use the exercise." Vena smirked. Then she remembered Ethan's words. Her smile faded. "They're sick," he had said. The escape plan. The bunker trembled from the blast above. Loose bolts and metal scraps rattled off the shelves, clinking onto the floor. Dust filtered down from the ceiling in thin, ghostly streams. Vena steadied herself against a nearby workbench, her fingers tightening around the sidearm Ethan had tossed her. "They know we're here," she said, scanning the walls, looking for an alternate exit. "They're coming." Ethan didn't answer immediately. He was focused on a display screen showing the colony ruins above. The 3 hunter drones had split up, methodically searching the area. Their smaller scouting drones flitted through the wreckage like mechanical insects, scanning for heat signatures, sound, anything alive. "They're blocking the main entrance," Ethan muttered, eyes darting over the screen. "But there's another way out." Vena turned sharply. "Where?" Ethan jerked a thumb toward a heavy blast door at the back of the bunker. "Old mining tunnels. They run deep under the colony. Dangerous, but better than getting caught topside." Vena exhaled sharply. "You could have mentioned this earlier." Ethan smirked. "Didn't trust you yet." Vena rolled her eyes, but followed as Ethan moved quickly to the blast door, inputting a series of codes into the ancient keypad. A heavy clunk echoed as the locking mechanism disengaged, and the door groaned open, revealing a dark, yawning tunnel lined with rusted tracks. The air was thick and stale, the scent of old metal, and damp stone clinging to the walls. Ethan grabbed a small handheld lantern and flicked it on. "Stay close," he said. "These tunnels go on for miles, and if you get lost, no one's coming to find you." Vena hesitated. Something about his tone made her pause. "You've been down here before." Ethan's grip on the lantern tightened. "Yeah," he said, voice quieter now. "And I'm not the only one." Vena didn't get a chance to ask what he meant. A distant, mechanical whir made her whip her head toward the bunker's entrance. The sound of shifting metal, heavy footsteps, and the sharp hiss of energy weapons priming to fire filled the air. "They're cutting through the door," Ethan said. His voice remained calm, but his hands moved faster now, adjusting a small device he had pulled from his pocket. Vena narrowed her eyes. "What is that?" "Distraction," he said simply. Before she could respond, Ethan pressed a button. A small, circular drone shot out from his workbench, zipping toward the bunker entrance. As it moved, it projected a heat signature identical to their own, making it appear as if they were still inside. "Go," Ethan said, grabbing her arm and pulling her into the tunnel. "We don't have long." They slipped into the darkness just as the bunker door exploded inward. Vena didn't look back. She didn't need to. The sharp electric hum of plasma rifles charging filled the air, followed by the whine of the slaver drones scanning the empty space they had just left. "Will that thing fool them?" Vena whispered. "Long enough," Ethan murmured. "But not forever." The tunnel sloped downward, the metal walls giving way to rough stone. The deeper they went, the colder it became. Their footsteps echoed softly against the rock, swallowed by the heavy silence of a place untouched for years. Vena kept her weapon drawn. Something about this place made her uneasy. It wasn't just the damp air or the stale, suffocating stillness. It was the feeling that they weren't alone. Ethan suddenly stopped, holding up a hand. "Wait." Vena halted, muscles tensing. "What?" Ethan crouched and ran his fingers over the ground, brushing away dust and debris. Beneath it, barely visible, was a trail of fresh footprints. Vena's stomach dropped. "You said you were alone here." "I thought I was," Ethan murmured, his voice tight. "But these tracks." He looked up, expression dark. "Someone else came this way." Recently. Vena's grip on her blaster tightened. Who? Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for a rusted metal hatch in the tunnel wall and pried it open. Inside was a small room, barely big enough for them both to fit. He motioned for her to step in. Vena hesitated. You're hiding us. I need to be sure, Ethan whispered. Whoever's down here, they're either a survivor. His expression darkened. Or something worse. Vena swallowed hard, stepping inside. Ethan followed, shutting the hatch behind them. Darkness swallowed them whole. Only the soft glow of the lantern lit their faces. Above them, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of something moving in the tunnel. Vena held her breath. It wasn't the slaver drones. Whatever it was human. Or at least, it had been once. Enemies at the door. The underground passage smelled of rust and damp earth. Dim emergency lights flickered along the walls, casting long, shifting shadows. Vena pressed a hand to her wound, her breath sharp and uneven. Ethan moved ahead of her, quick and sure-footed, as if he had walked these tunnels 100 times before. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't afraid. That was either reassuring or concerning. He stopped at a thick metal door and pressed a code into a keypad. With a hiss, the door slid open, revealing a small bunker cluttered with tools, cables, and half-assembled machines. A makeshift workbench held a disassembled plasma rifle, its components laid out like an unfinished puzzle. In the corner, an old power generator hummed faintly, keeping the bunker barely operational. Vena stepped inside cautiously. The place was crude, but functional. More importantly, it was safe, at least for now. Ethan shut the door behind them and turned to her, arms crossed. Start talking. Who's after you? Vena hesitated. She had spent her life on the run, trusting no one, least of all a human. But right now, she had no ship, no working weapon, and no time to be stubborn. They're slavers, she said finally. They hunt refugees, outlaws, anyone they can sell to the highest bidder. Ethan's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Slavers. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, like a blade hidden beneath cloth. Why are they after you specifically? Vena hesitated again. She could tell him the full truth, that she had stolen something from them. Something valuable enough to put a bounty on her head. Or she could lie. Before she could decide, a sharp beeping filled the bunker. Ethan's head snapped toward a monitor on the wall. A grainy, flickering image showed the ruined colony above them. Vena moved closer, eyes narrowing. 3 figures stepped into view. Their movements were stiff, unnatural. Their armor was sleek and dark, reflecting the dull light of the ruined colony. But it was their faces that made Vena tense. They had none. Biomechanical masks covered their heads, featureless except for glowing red sensors where eyes should have been. Hunter drones. Vena cursed under her breath. They brought machines. Ethan's fingers hovered over a control panel, his jaw tight. They're searching. The lead drone turned its head slowly, scanning the area. Then, with precise movements, it raised a metallic hand and released a swarm of smaller drones into the air. The tiny machines zipped through the ruins, their sensors pulsing. Vena clenched her fists. They'll find us. Ethan's eyes flicked toward her, assessing. You're important to them. Vena met his gaze but said nothing. Ethan exhaled sharply, then moved to the workbench. He grabbed a small device, no larger than his palm, and tossed it to her. She caught it instinctively. EMP charge, he said. Short range, but it'll fry anything electronic within a few meters. Vena turned it over in her hand, impressed despite herself. You built this. Ethan ignored the question. If they get close, use it. He turned back to the monitor. We'll wait until they split up, then move. Vena watched him. You seem awfully calm about all this. Ethan didn't look away from the screen. Slavers wiped out this colony, he said simply. I've been expecting them to come back. Vena frowned. Then why stay? He finally turned to her, because they didn't take everyone. A chill ran down Vena's spine. She hadn't seen any other humans here, hadn't sensed life beyond Ethan. And yet something in his expression told her he wasn't lying. A sudden static noise crackled from the monitor. The lead drone turned its head sharply, as if listening to something unseen. Then, without warning, it raised an arm and fired a pulse of energy into the ground. The explosion sent dust and debris into the air, rattling the walls around them. Vena's blood ran cold. They weren't searching anymore. They knew. Ethan grabbed a rifle from the workbench and tossed her a small sidearm. "Time to move," he said. Vena nodded, gripping the weapon tightly. They had minutes, maybe seconds, before the slavers broke through. And this time, she wasn't sure if they could escape. The slaver mothership's targeting systems glitched. Its cannons misfired. The engines stalled. It was only a few seconds, but it was enough. Vena yanked the flight controls. The ship shot past the enemy blockade, engines burning white-hot. They were clear. They were free. The aftermath. The cabin was eerily silent. Only the heavy breathing of survivors and the hum of the ship remained. Vena glanced back at the group. Ethan was on his knees, checking vitals. The humans were weak, but alive. Reyna slumped against the wall, exhaling hard. Well, that was suicidal. Vena smirked. Yeah, but it worked. Ethan looked up at her, eyes unreadable. You could have left. Taken the ship for yourself. Vena tilted her head, considering. She could have. It would have been easier. But as she stared at Ethan, at the people they had saved, she realized something. For the first time in her life, she didn't want to run. She took a breath and leaned against the controls. "So," she said casually, "where to, Captain?" Reyna scoffed. "Captain." Vena grinned. "Someone's got to be in charge. And I don't take orders." Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. He turned back to the controls, staring at the endless stretch of stars before them. "Then let's make it count," he said. Vena nodded, her fingers tightening around the flight controls. The ship surged forward. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't flying alone. She sprinted through the tunnels, weaving through rusted pipes and broken machinery. The slaver's ship was likely already landing near the wreckage of her own. If she could get to them before they figured out how to repair it, she could turn this fight in her favor. She reached the tunnel exit and stopped short. Above, in the ruined colony, a massive dropship had landed. Its dark hull gleamed under the stormy sky, red lights flashing along its armored sides. The cargo doors were already opening, and 5 armed figures strode out, their weapons at the ready. Vena inhaled slowly. 5 was manageable. Then the wind shifted, and she saw something else. A 6th figure emerging from the ship. Taller, bulkier, a full combat droid. Vena swallowed hard. That was not manageable. She gritted her teeth. No time to turn back now. She had to do this. Crouching low, she slipped between the ruins, moving fast, silent. She had one shot at this. The scouting party spread out, their weapons sweeping the area. The combat droid's red optics flickered, scanning for heat signatures. Vena timed her movement carefully. 1, 2, 3. She tossed the EMP charge. The second it hit the ground, a pulse of blue energy exploded outward. The droid's optics flickered violently and died. The slavers' comms cut off. Their weapons glitched, stuttering with static. Vena moved. Before the nearest slaver could react, she was on him, striking hard. Her elbow crashed against his temple, knocking him to the ground. Another turned, but she was already moving, swinging her stolen blaster up and firing. A third lunged at her. She twisted, using his own momentum to send him straight into the disabled droid. He yelped as the weight crushed him to the ground. 2 left. They scrambled, trying to reboot their weapons. Vena didn't give them the chance. She surged forward, grabbing one by the arm and twisting hard. There was a pop as his shoulder dislocated, and he went down screaming. The last one ran. Vena raised her weapon, steadying her breath. Before she could fire, a loud roar filled the sky. She looked up. The slaver mothership was descending, its cannons glowing hot. They were sending in reinforcements. Damn it. Vena activated her communicator. Ethan, change of plans. Static. She tried again. Reyna, do you copy? Nothing. The EMP had cut off her comms too. Her jaw clenched. The fight wasn't over. If anything, it had just begun. She turned back to the battlefield. The droid was beginning to reboot, its systems flickering back online. The slaver she had let escape. He was running toward the dropship, screaming into a backup communicator. Vena took a deep breath. Fine. If she had to end this fight alone, so be it. She charged toward the dropship and prayed Ethan was waking the others in time. She pressed a hand to her earpiece. Ethan, talk to me. Static. Then his voice. Quieter, heavier. We need that power core. Now. Vena exhaled sharply. How bad is it? A pause. Then. Bad. Vena clenched her fists. The slaver ship was still behind her, its engines primed, waiting for orders that would never come. She made her decision. I'm bringing the ship, she said. Reyna gave her a sharp look. Are you insane? Yes. Vena was already moving toward the cockpit ramp. Keep the slavers off me. Reyna didn't argue. She just reloaded. Vena sprinted up the ramp, adrenaline drowning out her pain. Inside, the controls were sleek, modern, easy to override if you knew how. And she knew how. Fingers flying over the interface, she hacked into the system, overriding security. The ship's engines rumbled to life beneath her. She pressed the comlink. Ethan, she said, get ready. I'm coming in hot. As the slaver mothership began to descend, filling the sky with shadows, Vena piloted the stolen ship straight toward the tunnels. The human factor. The stolen slaver ship roared through the ruins, engines glowing a deep blue as it banked hard, descending toward the underground tunnels. Vena gritted her teeth, fingers flying over the controls as red warning lights flashed across the cockpit. Incoming fire detected. A plasma blast shot past the hull, barely missing the ship. The slaver mothership was fully engaged now, its cannons charging for a direct strike. Vena's hands tightened around the controls. Not today. She wrenched the thrusters forward, pushing the stolen ship into a steep dive. The wind screamed against the hull as she dropped toward the ground, aiming for the hidden mining tunnel entrance where Ethan and the others waited. The slavers wouldn't expect this. No one would expect this. Vena activated the comm. Ethan, get them ready. I'm not landing. We're taking off. Static crackled before Ethan's voice came through, tight and urgent. The survivors, they're not stable. They need medical care, and fast. Vena cursed. The cryo sickness. Humans weren't meant to stay in stasis this long, and now that they were awake, their bodies were shutting down. Then we don't have a choice, she muttered. We're leaving now, or not at all. Ethan's voice was strained. Tunnels too small. You can't land. I know. Vena flipped a switch. The ship's cargo doors blew open, the metal ramp extending midair. Reyna's voice cut in. Oh, hell no. You want us to board a moving ship from inside a collapsing mine. Vena grinned, despite herself. You wanted to wake them up, Captain. Now keep them alive. Then, impact. The ship crashed through the tunnel entrance, metal scraping against stone, sparks showering the air. The walls trembled. Debris rained down in thick clouds of dust. Inside the bunker, Ethan and Reyna were already moving. The survivors, weak, barely conscious, were hauled up by Ethan as Reyna covered them with suppressive fire. The slaver drones were pushing forward, trying to stop the escape. They didn't have time. Ethan grabbed the first survivor and ran full speed toward the ramp, practically throwing them into the cargo bay. Reyna followed, dragging two more onto the ship. One survivor collapsed, legs barely working, but Ethan yanked them up and shoved them inside. The moment Reyna's boots hit the ramp, she slammed her fist into the control panel. The cargo doors sealed shut. "Go!" she roared. Vayna pulled the thrusters hard. The ship ripped out of the tunnels, breaking free from the underground, shooting into the storm-filled sky. The slaver mothership loomed above them, cannons locking on. Vayna's hands moved fast. The stolen ship's weapons were minimal, but they had one last trick. She punched the override on the reactor core. The stolen ship's shields flared, then collapsed, and in that moment, a pulse of raw energy exploded outward. Vayna didn't answer immediately. She could have lied, could have spun some story that made her seem noble, righteous, but she was too tired, too angry, and if these people were about to gamble on her life, she wanted them to know exactly who she was. She met Reyna's gaze without flinching. "Because the slavers hunting me. They aren't just looking for another bounty." She glanced at Ethan. "They'd want what I stole." Reyna's brow arched. "And what exactly did you steal?" Vayna's lips curved into a small, defiant smirk. "A warship." The tunnel fell into silence. Reyna's fingers twitched slightly against her weapon. Ethan inhaled sharply, processing what she had just said. Vayna took a slow step forward. "I can get you out of here. I can get all of you out of here." Her gaze flickered toward the cryo hold. "But I'm going to need that power core." Reyna studied her, unreadable. Then, without breaking eye contact, she turned to Ethan. "Is she serious?" Ethan exhaled. "Oh yeah." Reyna was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, she lowered her weapon. A ghost of a smile crossed her lips. "Well then," she said, "let's wake the others." The battle for freedom. The steel door groaned open, revealing a dimly lit chamber lined with frost-covered cryopods. The air inside was thick with the scent of metal and stale coolant, the hum of old machinery vibrating through the floor. Vayna stepped inside cautiously, her sharp eyes scanning the pods. There were at least 6 of them. Each one held a human, their faces frozen in the quiet stillness of deep sleep. Ethan moved past her, placing a hand on one of the pods. His expression softened, just for a moment. "They've been here for years," he murmured. "Since the colony fell." Vayna folded her arms, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her. This changed everything. She had assumed Ethan was just another lost human scraping by in the ruins of his people's history. But now she saw him for what he really was. A protector. A man who refused to leave the last remnants of his people behind. Reyna adjusted her weapon strap and turned to Vayna. "You said you stole a warship," she said, her tone steady, unreadable. "Where is it?" Vayna exhaled, rubbing the back of her neck. "It's not exactly in one piece." Reyna's expression darkened. "Explain." "It was heavily damaged when I took it," Vayna admitted. "I managed to get away, but not before they hit my engines. That's why I crashed here." Reyna exchanged a glance with Ethan. Neither of them looked surprised, but neither looked relieved either. "So you're telling me," Reyna said slowly, "that you've led slavers, who are already hunting us, directly to a downed warship they could easily repair and use." Vayna's jaw clenched. She didn't like how that sounded. "They don't have it yet," she shot back. Reyna's eyes narrowed. "But they will if we don't move fast." Ethan turned toward the cryopods, his fingers flying over the controls. The old system flickered to life, blinking weakly as it began the thawing sequence. "We don't have time to argue," he said. "Once they've reached the tunnels, we'll be boxed in." A sharp beeping noise echoed from Vayna's wrist communicator. She glanced down. The tracker feed from her ship had just gone active. Her stomach twisted. The slavers had found it. She cursed. "We need to go. Now." Reyna didn't hesitate. She moved to the control panel next to Ethan and tapped a few commands. The pods hissed as warm air was pumped inside, slowly reviving their occupants. "This will take time," she muttered. "Too much time." Vena weighed the situation. The slavers had her ship. If they salvaged it, they'd have the power to hunt them across the stars. That meant she needed to stop them before they got it running. "I'll hold them off," she said suddenly. Ethan looked up. "What?" Vena squared her shoulders. "I know how slavers work. They'll send a small scouting party first, probably to assess how damaged the ship is. If I intercept them, I can slow them down." Reyna frowned. "And how do you plan to do that?" "Walk in and ask them nicely." Vena smirked. "Not exactly." Without waiting for an answer, she pulled out the EMP charge Ethan had given her earlier and tossed it in the air, catching it smoothly. "I disable their scouts. No comms. No tracking. They'll be blind for a while." Ethan hesitated. He didn't like the idea of her going alone. "You're injured," he pointed out. Vena gave a lopsided grin. "Yeah, so are you." Before he could argue, she was already moving. The betrayal. The darkness inside the cramped hideout pressed in on Vena like a living thing. The soft hum of Ethan's lantern barely pierced the suffocating blackness, casting flickering shadows along the rusted walls. Outside, the faint but unmistakable sound of footsteps echoed through the tunnel. Slow, cautious, human, or something pretending to be. Vena held her breath, her fingers tightening around the grip of her blaster. Ethan, crouched beside her, moved with deliberate silence, pulling out a small cylindrical device from his belt. She recognized it immediately, a pulse scrambler, a tool meant to disrupt motion sensors and electronic trackers. But if this thing in the tunnel was organic, it wouldn't help them. The footsteps stopped. For a long, aching moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, a whisper. Not words, just a soft, rustling noise, like breath scraping against stone. Vena's stomach knotted. She had traveled through war zones, hidden in slaver ships, and survived encounters with some of the worst creatures in the galaxy. But this was wrong. Ethan turned his head just slightly, his voice barely audible. "We move on my count. Quiet." Vena gave the smallest nod. 3, 2, 1. They slipped out, moving soundlessly through the darkness. Ethan led the way, his lantern dimmed to a faint glow. The tunnel twisted ahead, curving sharply downward. The air grew colder, damp. The scent of rust and stagnant water thickened. Vena chanced a glance back. Nothing. Whatever had been there wasn't following, or it was waiting. She hated either option. Ethan pressed forward, leading her through a series of tight corridors that seemed to wind deeper and deeper into the underground network. It felt endless. Then, abruptly, he stopped. Vena nearly ran into him. "What?" she whispered. Ethan didn't answer. He was staring at something ahead, a small steel door, half buried under fallen debris. Vena frowned. A dead end. Ethan didn't look at her. His jaw was tight, his shoulders rigid. "No, this is where I needed to go." Vena's breath hitched. She took a step back, instinct flaring. "What are you talking about?" Ethan turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "There's something you need to know." She didn't like the way he said that. "I lied to you," Ethan admitted. Vena stiffened. "I'm not the last survivor." A sharp, mechanical click echoed through the tunnel. Before Vena could react, a blaster barrel was pressed against the back of her skull. A third voice spoke from the darkness, a woman's voice. Low, rough. "Drop the weapon, alien." Vena's pulse slammed against her ribs. Her grip tightened on her blaster, but she didn't lower it. "Ethan," she said slowly, "if this is a trick." "It's not," he said, his voice calm but edged with something she couldn't quite place. "Just listen." Vena clenched her jaw. She was so close to getting off this rock. Her ship was damaged. The slavers were hunting her. And now, this. She exhaled through her nose and did something she rarely ever did. She trusted. Slowly, she loosened her grip, letting the blaster slide to the ground. The weapon clattered against the metal floor, and the pressure at the back of her skull eased. She turned, her eyes locking onto the person who had spoken. A human woman stood there, dressed in tattered combat gear, her dark eyes scanning Vena with sharp calculation. Her blaster was steady, her stance solid. She looked like someone who had been fighting for a long time. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, exhaling. Vena, meet Captain Reyna Holt. Captain. Vena's mind raced. She's military. Used to be, Reyna answered, lowering her weapon. Before the war ended and the galaxy left us behind. Vena frowned. What are you talking about? Ethan gestured to the steel door. This isn't just a bunker. It's a cryo hold. There are more survivors. My people. The air between them suddenly felt heavy. Vena's pulse thrummed in her ears. She had spent so long thinking humans were weak, scattered, dying, that this colony was abandoned. But if Ethan was telling the truth, if there were more humans hidden here, everything changed. Reyna's expression hardened. You're an alien fugitive, Vena. The only reason you're standing here is because Ethan vouched for you. So tell me, why should I trust you?